Welcome to this explainer. We're going to dive right into a terrifying, but honestly incredibly realistic hypothetical scenario that experts have modeled out for us. The date, February 28th, 2026.
So in this scenario, the US and Israel launch a massive military strike on Iran. We're talking nearly 900 strikes in just 12 hours, targeting military bases, missile sites, nuclear facilities. It is one of the most devastating opening salvos in modern history. But Iran's response? It actually doesn't come with missiles. Instead, they do something way simpler, and honestly, infinitely more disruptive. They just close a tiny 21-mile strip of water.
The global fallout from this is instant, and it is catastrophic. Within a single week, oil surges past $126 a barrel. Iraq literally has to shut down its oil fields because, well, there's nowhere to put the crude. By week 2, Qatar declares force majeure, which is just a fancy legal term meaning the world has changed so drastically they simply can't fulfill their contracts. And by week 3, Pakistan is forced to close its schools just to save electricity. It completely paralyzes everything.
Now, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but that number perfectly illustrates the core vulnerability here. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the distance from central London to Heathrow Airport. It's barely a gap at all. Yet it is the absolute bottleneck for the entire global economy, sitting right between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. It's literally the only way out of the Persian Gulf.
And through that incredibly narrow 21-mile gap, roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass every single day. That staggering number accounts for a full 1/5 of the entire world's daily consumption. Think about that. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the liquefied natural gas from Qatar that actually heats European homes during the winter. All of it has to funnel through this one tiny corridor before it can ever reach the open ocean.
It gets even more alarming when you look at how deeply dependent some massive economies are on this single, fragile exit point. Japan relies on the Gulf for roughly 70% of its total oil supply. China gets a full third of its oil through this exact passage. South Korea, Taiwan, India, it's the exact same story across the board. They are entirely reliant on a door they simply do not control.
But here's the absolutely crucial point to take away. This isn't just an oil story, it's a civilization story. When this passage closes, about a third of the global fertilizer trade is trapped. Fertilizer prices spike, food prices immediately follow, directly hitting, say, a farmer in Bangladesh. It chokes off helium for hospitals, aluminum for manufacturing, and the raw petrochemicals needed for the plastics we use every single day. You know, a commuter in Munich might never have laid eyes on this specific body of water, but their daily life depends completely on it staying open.
There's a quote from the source material that perfectly distills this entire threat. It goes, "You don't need to win a war to paralyze the global economy. You just need to close the right door." And every government on Earth knows this. Every modern military has wargamed this exact vulnerability, knowing full well that a single order can effectively hold the entire world hostage.
Which brings us to Section 1, a 500-year hostage situation.
Because this geographic trap isn't some modern accident, and it's definitely not a glitch in our current system. It's a dynamic that has existed for 5 centuries, ever since 1507 actually, when a Portuguese explorer named Albuquerque realized he'd found a real cheat code on the map of the world. He realized you don't need to conquer a vast region to own its wealth, you just need to, well, own the exit. And since then, world powers have continuously fought over this exact same choke point. The Portuguese, the Persians, the British East India Company, straight through to the 1980s with the Iran-Iraq tanker war. It's new flags, but the exact same logic. If you own the door, the world has to ask you for permission.
And this brings us to a massive, undeniable geographical reality. Iran doesn't just border the strait, it controls islands right in the middle of the shipping lanes. They're positioned perfectly to monitor and, if necessary, physically challenge anything that moves. For over 40 years, Iran has lived right there in that doorframe, and they know exactly where all the hinges are.
Moving on to Section 2, the Navy versus the bureaucrats.
So, you might be wondering, why haven't the world's most powerful military solved this yet? Well, it really comes down to physical power versus paper power. You have the United States Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain, just 30 minutes away from the strait. We're talking aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, literally one of the most powerful forces ever assembled. But crazy enough, they are practically powerless against a single phone call from a gray office building full of insurance underwriters in London.
Welcome to the London Trap. I found this part absolutely fascinating. You see, the strait isn't built for massive naval warfare. It's practically a knife fight in a dark room. Think swarms of fast attack boats and cheap plastic mines that are perfectly designed to hide from sonar. So,
The moment a conflict begins, underwriters review their exposure. If one ship goes down, they pull coverage entirely. And without insurance, no commercial captain on Earth is going to sail into that water, not because they're cowards, but because there is zero policy covering the ship, the cargo, or the crew.
There's this chilling hypothetical exchange that perfectly distills the trap. The US Navy can sweep for mines, they can secure the lane, they can even offer to escort every single tanker through the water. But they cannot force a London firm to write an insurance policy for a vessel sailing through an active war zone. Who insures them, right? It's a profound question. The military lock might be broken, but that financial lock stays firmly shut.
And Iran has understood this dynamic for decades. You don't even need to physically block the water. A handful of mines in one narrow lane totally does the job. In fact, even a mere rumor of mines is enough to completely freeze the market. The market doesn't wait for a ship to actually sink, it panics at the very first shot. This leaves nations who had absolutely zero part in the conflict, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, helplessly watching their economies grind to a sudden, screeching halt.
When this happens, the clock runs out incredibly fast. Even if the International Energy Agency releases the largest emergency oil reserve in its entire history, do you know how much time that actually buys the world? Exactly 4 days. 4! That is how utterly reliant the globe is on a constant, uninterrupted flow through those 21 miles.
Let's look at our final section, why nothing ever changes.
So why does the world just tolerate this massive exposure instead of fixing it once and for all? We have to look at the fix versus the reality. Now, pipelines that bypass the strait do exist, but they were built decades ago and can only handle a fraction of the flow. To completely solve the problem, to build enough bypass pipelines would cost tens of billions of dollars. And you'd have to pitch that massive budget for a crisis that might only happen once a decade. When the strait is open, oil is cheap and shipping is reliable. So the world continuously takes the cheaper option. Just cross our fingers and trust the door stays open. But there is one final, incredibly ironic reason why the cheaper option usually works. It's the ultimate standoff. Why does the crisis eventually end? Because Iran's own economy runs on oil revenue. And Iran's oil has to exit through the exact same water they just closed. So the leverage works both ways. Eventually the pressure mounts, the door unlocks, and the tankers finally start moving again.
The crisis fades, and the hard questions are quietly set aside so we can all enjoy cheap oil again. The tankers always move, but the geography never ever changes. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. We are entirely dependent on a 500-year-old hostage situation. So, how long can the world truly survive on the cheaper option before our luck finally runs out? Thanks for joining.